You have played Tetris. Your parents have played Tetris. Tetris has sold over 500 million copies and is the world's most downloaded game by a significant margin, generating over $5 billion revenue to date. And the man who created Tetris has received nothing from it. For over 10 years, this man has witnessed everyone on the planet playing Tetris for free and the Soviet government keeping every penny of the revenue from Tetris. This is the story of how a simple puzzle game became a weapon during the Cold War and how its creator was cheated by his own country. 1984, Moscow. Alexey Pajitnov is working as a computer programmer for the Dorodnitsin Computing Center at the Soviet Academy of Sciences in Moscow, doing tests of various pieces of new computer hardware. Pajitnov was an avid puzzle enthusiast, and he began to wonder, what if 5 square geometric shapes were dropped from the top of a computer screen and had to be placed in a flat area beneath the dropping shapes before they made it to the top of the screen? To find out, he built a simple version of the game on his Electronica 60. It had no colors or sounds and was only based on dropping shapes on top of one another. He played it and became addicted the first time he played. He called his game Tetris. Tetra is a Greek word meaning 4, and tennis is Pajitnov's favorite sport. Before long, Pajitnov and his colleagues had shared Tetris so much that it had brought to a standstill the entire computing center. Everyone had been playing Tetris and playing it so much that it was spreading throughout the city of Moscow by floppy disk like a virus. The game was so highly addictive that some government offices had even banned it from there and were banning it because employees cannot stop playing. But the main problem was that in the Soviet Union, you couldn't actually own what you created. Everything created belonged to the state, every invention, every idea, every line of code, as it was a creation of Pajitnov's then-employer, the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The Academy of Sciences technically owned Tetris. When Pajitnov created Tetris, he was required to sign a 10-year agreement with the state granting them all rights to the creation. He had no option. The state organization responsible for licensing Tetris to the world was called Elektron-Org Technica, referred to as ELORG. Their job was to determine who could sell the product outside of the USSR, and they would keep 100% of the money received for the sale of Tetris. Pajitnov received nothing at all. He did not receive any royalties or any bonuses or any form of recognition whatsoever for the creation of Tetris. He simply continued to receive his modest salary from the government, while Tetris continued to spread all over the world. Meanwhile, there was a British businessman, Robert Stein, who discovered Tetris in Hungary. He immediately saw the financial potential of Tetris and began negotiating with the Soviets to license Tetris outside of the USSR. Stein contacted Pajitnov directly, but because Pajitnov had very limited skills in speaking English, it resulted in a situation where Stein began to sublicense Tetris rights to Western companies without appropriate rights from Pajitnov, and there arose numerous complicated negotiations surrounding the game that none of the parties fully controlled. In 1988, Tetris was available in the United States and Europe, becoming an immediate success as players became addicted to it. However, within the Tetris development community, there was a battle taking place surrounding rights to Tetris that fueled various claims from companies, such as Mirrorsoft, Spectrum Holobyte, Atari, and Sega. Each wanted part of the most addictive video game of all time. Meanwhile, Hank Rogers was an American game designer, born in the Netherlands, who was living in Japan. He saw Tetris for the first time at the 1988 Consumer Electronics Show and realized immediately that it would change gaming. Rogers came up with a groundbreaking idea. He felt that Tetris should be bundled with every Game Boy because Nintendo was near the launch of its first major portable video game console. To make this happen, Rogers needed the official rights to Tetris, with the companies authorized to grant those rights based in Moscow and still behind the Iron Curtain. Hank Rogers made a bold decision in February 1989 to fly to Moscow without a visa, without an invite or informing anyone, and walked into Elorg's offices and tried to buy the rights to Tetris. The KGB immediately put him under surveillance because they were suspicious of this foreigner, who had arrived out of nowhere asking about this highly valuable piece of software. Robert Stein had arrived in Moscow at the same time as Rogers to renew his licensing agreement, as did Kevin Maxwell, the son of the powerful British media mogul Robert Maxwell, representing MirrorSoft. 3 men, 3 companies, all coincidentally in Moscow, all competing for the same game rights, a real-life Cold War thriller. Rogers had one big advantage. He was honest. He told the Soviets the truth about how Stein had sublicensed Tetris without any authorization. He showed them contracts, and he exposed the entire mess that had been going on. When Elorg heard from Rogers what really happened, they were shocked to find out that they had been cheated and that their rights to their game had been sold many times without them having realized or having received any payment. At the end, Hank Rogers obtained handheld rights for Nintendo. Tetris launched bundled with the Game Boy in 1989. It was an ideal pairing of games, and it has sold more than 35 million copies to date, making it the #1 seller of all time for the Game Boy. Meanwhile, Alexey Pajitnov had received nothing, so he sat in Moscow and watched his creation take over the world. The fall of the Soviet Union occurred in 1991, and shortly afterwards, Pajitnov moved to the USA with his family. Following this move, Pajitnov worked for several different technology firms. However, he had still not acquired ownership over Tetris. The 10-year contract with the Soviet government that Pajitnov entered into still existed and prevents him from receiving 1 cent of earnings from the product that he had developed. Not until 12 years after developing Tetris, in 1996, did Pajitnov regain full title to Tetris, and he entered into a partnership with Hank Rogers to create Tetris Company, as Alexey Pajitnov was paid by a company he created from Tetris for the very first time in his life. More than 520 million copies of Tetris have been sold to date and generated over $5 billion of revenue. Even today, Tetris can be played by anyone who owns a phone or tablet, video game console, or any computer. Even today, it is probably being played through a smartwatch. Over 12 years, the creator of Tetris made nothing from his creation, yet his creation was worth billions to businesses and governments, while he lived on a government salary and in an extremely small apartment in Moscow. Sign up if you want to read about more unsuccessful geniuses who have changed the course of human history and have never get compensated for their genius contribution to his or her domain of scientific study